Welcome to Roots and Branches of Lehi, the podcast where we get to know the faces, stories, and lives that make up our community. I'm Ryan Harding, and I started this podcast as a way for us all to connect with the people we live alongside. Growing up in a small town, I learned that connections go beyond blood. They're built through shared experiences, friendships, and the moments we celebrate together. Each week, we'll sit down with someone new from Lehi to share their unique story, their passions, and what they love most about living here. So whether you've been here for years or just arrived, join us as we deepen our roots and reach out to our branches one story at a time. Welcome, Buddy Deimler, to Roots and Branches of Lehi. Excited to have you here and get to know you a little bit better. So thanks for coming on the show. Tell me a little bit about you. You from Lehi? Where'd you grow up and stuff like that?
I was actually born and raised in New Mexico.
Okay.
That's where my roots are.
Huh.
My parents were actually born and raised in Pennsylvania. They met in Florida, and the military kind of brought my dad to New Mexico, White Sands Missile Range, Holloman Air Force Base.
Okay.
That was his work and lifestyle. They ended up in New Mexico, and that's where I was born, and that's where I was raised.
Okay. And so then what brought you to Lehi? How'd you get here?
It's actually not necessarily to Lehi, but Utah. It's a funny story. Just like everybody else, I wanted to make a little more money in my job. Yeah. I had a similar position in Arizona that I was recruited for in Utah. And so I came to Utah, and they offered me the job, and I went back to my boss in Arizona and said, for a little more money, I might stay. And he goes, I'm sorry, that ain't going to happen. So I ended up in Utah.
Okay.
So there wasn't a plan or anything. It just kind of happened.
Just sure, yeah.
And how we ended up in Lehi was I had 5 children, and I wanted them to be a part of a good agricultural education program.
Yeah.
So I just started driving south until I ran into one, and it was in Lehi.
Okay.
Clay Christensen also lived here.
Yeah.
And he had been the ag teacher at Lehi High School before he went to the State Board of Education.
Okay.
And so Lehi seemed to be a good fit. When I moved here, there was probably 8,000 or 9,000 people in this town. So it was a perfect small rural community, a place to raise my kids. It just seemed like a good fit.
Yeah. And what year was it that you moved here?
1994.
Okay. Yeah, 30 years ago.
Yep.
So 30 plus. So how you mentioned how small it was back then. Obviously, as a guy that's agriculture, that small town, tell me how that growth is, your thoughts on the growth and stuff like that have happened over that period of time.
Yeah, my kids and I have this argument all the time. If you want to be a part of a strong economy where there are lots of jobs and the pay is relatively good, then you're going to live in a place like Lehi where there's lots of growth happening and lots of people moving here, and it's a double-edged sword. It makes life a little expensive sometimes and a little hectic and stressful, but it's a strong economy. Lehi is a good place to be right now. Yeah. I can remember when we moved here, it was, I don't want to say the agriculture was the main occupation in town.
Sure.
Geneva Steel and a couple other places, but it's very obvious now that agriculture is not the main focus of Lehi.
Yeah.
So that's changed dramatically over the years.
Yeah. And so let's talk about that job then, I guess, that you have. So tell me what it is that so when you moved here in 1994, what was the job description? What were you doing at that time?
My job description was called the Education Specialist for Agricultural Education, and I was the state FFA advisor.
Okay.
The FFA is a part of the agricultural education program in a high school.
Okay.
So if you're the agriculture teacher in a high school, then you would teach those classes and you would be the FFA advisor.
Okay.
And so I had that job at the state level. I worked with a handful of kids, but mostly I worked with teachers.
Okay.
And my job was curriculum, funding, program approval, those kinds of things.
Okay. And how long did you do that for?
I did it for 29 years in Utah, 36 years total, part of that in Arizona.
Okay. And
my career spanned 43 years. I started teaching in 1980 in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Okay.
In a high school that had an enrollment of about 3,800 students, which was incredible.
Sure.
Almost as large as the town I grew up in.
Yeah.
So it was a kind of a culture shock, but it was a great experience.
Yeah. FFA, Future Farmers of America, says that when kids take these classes in high school and stuff like that, is the goal to become a farmer kind of thing? Or tell me or is it just to learn about that area in the world as far as the economy and stuff like that? Or tell me what happens with those students, I guess, in that regard.
In 1928, when this all started, and that's FFA, agricultural education had actually been a part of secondary education for probably 10 or 20 years before that. The adults in the world who were making agricultural decisions at your land-grant colleges, extension service, those kinds of things, realized that it was very hard to convince a dad to change his ways. And they decided to employ a tactic to teach the kids new ways, which is also what 4-H in the extension service is all about, training kids to see things a different way so that they could teach their fathers. It sounds subversive, but it didn't mean to be. It was just a case of, if you do things this way, maybe that sow will farrow 12 pigs instead of 6.
Sure.
And if you don't see it, then you don't believe it until your son or daughter. And it was mostly sons in the early years. Girls were not a part of Ag Education or FFA. Or at least not very often, I guess you should say. But that was the purpose for it. And these classes started in high school, and the whole purpose was to teach kids agricultural science. So I'd say, yes, in 1928, 1930, the purpose was to train kids to send them back to the farm. What I did for the last 40 years had very little to do with farming because those opportunities did not exist. It was to take kids who maybe had never heard about agriculture and to teach them about the opportunities that are available. And there are opportunities available everywhere, whether you were thinking about business or research or production or processing or almost anything you could think of. There was a place for you in agricultural education in the industry of agriculture. Just to give you an example, I was working with a tractor dealership out at Stokes Farm Equipment out in Nephi, and we were talking back and forth about what they needed. They were supporting us in some contests that we were doing, and so I was just talking with him, and he said, what I really need is a kid that loves agriculture that can code and program, because today's tractors are very technical, and you need somebody that can look through the code, find the mistakes, or make corrections, or do whatever needs to happen to get that tractor back in the field and working. And so that was his number one thing. He had plenty of good technicians and plenty of good mechanics, good salespeople, all of which came out of our classrooms in those rural communities. But what he needed was someone who loved agriculture but could also understand coding and programming.
Understand the technical side of it. Interesting. So it's, less about then, like you mentioned 1928, less about the kids going back to the farm and helping their dads, and more, because is a lot of farming less family and it's more corporations now? Or is that a misnomer, I guess?
No, it's a challenge that's very prominent in Utah, and that's the fact that, and I would say that well over 95% of the farms in America are still family farms. Even though some of them are very large. They're all family farms. Now, if they have an ounce of sense, then they are incorporated somehow for tax purposes and business purposes. But I think the point I'm trying to get across is if you have 6 children and you have a 500-acre farm, there's no way to divide that farm so that each of those 6 children could make a living that could. And you don't want to break up the farm. So part of that is trying to find opportunities for those other kids to enter the agricultural industry and not be on the farm. And I make it seem like what I said made it seem like it's a real issue. And in some cases it is. Not every kid wants to come back to the farm. If you have children, you know that if you have 5 children, you got 6 different personalities and interests in that family.
That's exactly it.
But it's important to capture those kids who have an honest background in agriculture. I can remember attending many talks and presentations over the years, and the number one thing that they said was, if I have to hire a kid for anything in any field, I'm most interested to see on their resume that they grew up on a farm or they grew up farming. Because from my perspective, and I think that it's really true, that they have an opportunity to learn how to work, problem solve, think outside the box. All the word phrases that we use to describe those things happen in a situation in agriculture that are not likely to happen anywhere else. And the good reason for that is because if you go into any other industry, a child might have an opportunity to work in that industry with their mother or their father. But if you take a kid off the street, there's all kinds of rules about what they can do, what they can't do. And a lot of them for good reason. On a farm, all that disappears almost because it's family. And so I was driving a tractor before I could legally drive a truck. My dad asked me to do things not because he wanted to teach me something. It was because there was no other way to get the work done.
Yeah, he needed you.
Yeah, he needed me. And so I made lots of mistakes. I learned lots of things, and I learned how to be independent and how to think on my own. And I think that happens to every kid who's put into those opportunities that allow them to grow. I almost hate to say without a lot of adult supervision, but that's exactly what it is. Sometimes we smother kids and we don't give them a chance to think through things and to struggle and to grow. So
we give them the answer maybe a little too quickly.
Yes.
And
we're helpful adults, and sometimes kids don't need helpful adults.
Because, again, the struggle is actually where they learn.
That's where you grow.
Yeah.
It's like a chick coming out of an eggshell.
Sure.
They got to struggle, or they don't do well in life without that initial struggle.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. So I grew up personally in North Dakota. There's a lot of farms up there, and I had a couple friends that they both had farms, their families did, and they worked them and stuff like that. They were family farms, but none of the kids went back into that. In fact, I don't think they've sold the farm, but they've consolidated. Is that, you see a lot of that happening, I guess, with farms where, ironically, they all had kind of girls and they just didn't want to go and do it and stuff. But I'm guessing it was just harder for them. That they weren't making a lot. And again, I don't know how big their farms were in comparison to other things, but I don't know. Do you see that, or is that, as far as, I don't know if you were that close to that kind of stuff, I guess, too, but.
I tried to stay close to it. Part of my responsibility in developing curriculum was to make sure that what we were teaching kids in the classroom actually had relevance in the industry.
Yeah.
And so I maintained a pretty close relationship with Utah Farm Bureau Federation, Utah Farmers Union, big, what I would call ag corporations like Intermountain Farmers, Western Ag Credit, and there are many. I know I'll forget some and offend somebody, but there's a whole list of people that I try to stay in close contact with. And those people were on advisory committees, or they looked at curriculum, or they provided input, or to maintain what I would consider. Yeah, I know I'm not answering the original question, but I'm telling you that, yes, ag teachers do spend a lot of time building relationships with people in the industry. Now, are farms changing? Absolutely, they're changing. I can give you many examples I saw over the years, but we have some right here in Utah, up in Heber Valley.
Okay.
Kohler Dairy.
Okay.
Russ Kohler and his family. They got to a point where the land was just too valuable to graze cattle or raise feed, and as they got smaller and smaller, pushed smaller and smaller, they had to find a different way to add value to their product. And what they did was they make cheese. Okay. And so I've been all over the Intermountain West, and you can find Heber Valley cheese almost everywhere. Yeah. So that's an example. Another example is in Wisconsin, where the farmer was facing the exact same thing you were talking about, where he had several kids who wanted to be involved, small dairy. Yeah. And so they branched off, and one of the family developed a store where you could buy raw milk and butter and ice cream. And one of the families went into the processing part where they were making the ice cream and the butter. And so they were each a part of the family business, but it had to expand. Sure. And so you see a lot of that. It doesn't always work out because not everybody has those interests, but yes, there are many examples. There are also examples where, and this is much harder, but it is possible, where we had an example of a kid in Salt Lake. He went to Granite Technical Institute, and his mother was a doctor. His dad was a lawyer. I think I'm getting that right. But anyway, they were professional, white-collar, very well educated, and they had this son who was wandering through high school, not really knowing what to do, and bumped into Bill Carpenter, who was the ag teacher there. Mm-hmm. And Bill Carpenter just turned him on to all the exciting things in agriculture. And when he graduated, I haven't followed up on him after that, but I know Bill would tell me every chance he got before he retired and moved on. But he moved, the young man graduated from high school, he graduated from high school with a few cows under his belt, so to speak.
Sure, yeah.
Moved to Idaho, went to school, and built his herd. And his whole intent was to eventually find a place where he could expand that herd so that it was something he could do for a living rather than just put change in your pocket. Sure. So you have kids like that also. And that happens over and over again. Those kids are harder to find because it is very tough to, especially in a place like Utah County where you can barely afford to buy land for a home, let alone for a farm. Sure. And you can't blame farmers. A lot of farmers think about a 50-year career, and the land and the farm is their retirement. They put everything into that. And so they need to find some way to get a retirement income out of that, whether it's their kids paying them for it or somebody else or however that works. But you certainly can't take that away from them. it sounds easy to just say, why don't we just say if it's ag land, it's going to be ag land forever. That means that the farmer never gets any, or the landowner never gets any benefit out of it. So it's a tough thing.
Yeah, without that, Lehi would be undeveloped.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, none of us would probably have homes, I guess.
That's absolutely.
If that was the case and stuff. So and when that happens, does the farm just go away, or does the farmer then sometimes move to further out? They go to places that are undeveloped again, and they go.
Yeah, I think it depends on how big the farm was. Arizona is a perfect example of this. I taught at a school, Agua Fria High School, Coldwater High School.
Yeah.
It's in Avondale, Arizona, which is about 18 miles west of Phoenix.
Okay.
And when I was there, every square inch of it was covered with cotton and cantaloupe and watermelon and winter vegetables. Sure. I mean, just thousands of acres.
Yeah.
And today it's all covered in houses. That's exactly what happened. Those huge businesses, they just picked up and moved west.
Okay.
Mostly.
Sure.
Or some other place to restart the business. Classic example is when I moved there as an ag teacher, we had a feedlot right in the middle of town.
Sure.
And it caused quite a stink, no pun intended.
Sure.
And eventually got to the point where the land under the feedlot was valuable enough for them to pick up by 3 times what they had in Goodyear.
Yeah.
Build a facility and start the whole process over again.
Yeah.
And it was good for them. It was good for the city. It was good for everybody involved.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think if they're big enough and their intent is to stay involved in agriculture, that's what happens. In a place like Utah, that gets harder and harder to do.
Sure.
Because you have the Wasatch Front and then you have the West Desert.
Yeah.
And
there's no water. Or
it's hard to expand.
Yeah, it's hard to expand. Yeah, that makes sense.
There's no water yet.
No water yet. That's right.
They haven't figured that out yet, so.
It's coming then, right?
I don't know. You just never can tell.
Yeah.
I'm sure that people who were here 50, 60, 70 years ago are looking at this going, that's amazing. How are they doing that?
Yeah.
It's because we get more efficient.
Yeah.
We have better technology. Yeah.
Speak to that for a second. So then, obviously as the population grows and stuff like that, we need more water. Does FFA play any role in that? Or do you see any kind of where the West Desert could eventually be farmed if we had more, whether it's trying to find ways to get water out there?
Yeah, and I wasn't telling a secret.
Sure, yeah.
Busting the big news on
sure.
local podcasts, because I don't know. I'm just saying that we're farming ground today that 100 years ago would have been impossible to farm.
Fair enough.
And a lot of it has to do with technologies, whether that's a sprinkler irrigation or drip irrigation or many technologies that just the concept, people don't think about this, but if you take drip irrigation is what I'm most familiar with. When I was a teacher in Arizona, drip irrigation was just coming on the market. Yeah. There were a lot of places in Israel that were, if you wanted to know about drip irrigation, that's one of the places you went. And so there were lots of Israeli engineers in Arizona. They grew lots and lots of cotton on drip irrigation. They buried it in the ground like 6-7 inches and raised that cotton up. But I talked to some of the farmers, and they had their engineers come over to our school, and they put it in a state-of-the-art drip irrigation system. People would stop by and look at it because it was on a small scale, and you could see it. Sure. But we grew everything on that little plot of ground, and we had about a 20-acre farm there. Oh, okay. We grew everything on that plot of ground that they were growing in the valley, and so you could come and see it on a much smaller scale, and my kids could see it. Wow. And flood irrigation, sprinkler irrigation, all those technologies have their place, but drip irrigation had a kind of a niche in that. Sure. The vegetable production, or even cotton, like I said. I don't know whether they do that anymore or not. Harwood Farms is a classic example. This down in Springville. Yeah. A lot of what they do is drip irrigation. He grows a lot of vegetables. Very, very efficient to do it that way. Yeah. And he's not the only one. There are many around, but he's one that I can think of off the top of my head. Sure.
And I'm speaking a little bit more to technology. Since you're in this kind of area, what have you seen? Obviously, you just mentioned water irrigation and stuff like that, but what other technologies have you seen where, wow, we're really able to do so much more than we could before? And a second question to that was, what do you see coming, too, in that area?
Yeah, I don't know if I could foreshadow anything. I don't really. But I have seen a lot since my days as a kid on the farm, so to speak. Most of what we did was pretty involved manual labor. I grew up on a alfalfa farm. It was about an 80-acre farm, and I didn't grow up on it. I grew up farming. Yeah. And then where I was at in Tularosa, New Mexico, that was a big part of the pecan industry.
Okay.
In fact, I think Stallman's pecan orchard in Las Cruces, New Mexico, at that time was the largest orchard in the world.
Oh, wow.
So it was really a big business. And so I watched that change from where there were very rudimentary ways to shake a tree to get nuts out of the tree, and then you picked them up by hand and
Sure.
cleaned them by hand, put them in a sack and sold them, to, and I watched that grow up right there in my little town as I was a part of that.
Yeah.
The shakers became more technical. They used equipment to brush all the pecans in rows, pick them up with a machine, blow it, all the dust and sticks and leaves out of it. By the time it got to the processing plant, it was a pretty clean product, and they'd run it through a brusher to take any husks off that remained. And then I've been in plants. We've done a lot of educational tours. I have done a lot of educational tours with teachers over the years.
Yeah.
So we try to take them places where these technologies we're talking about are available, in robotics, cameras, electric eyes, puffs of air that take bad fruit or nuts out of a conveyor belt, just all kinds of things that you can't even imagine that we've seen coming around the corner for the last 50 years.
Wow. Yeah.
Tractors, autonomous tractors.
Yeah.
I was just watching a video the other day of, and this is not completely new technology, but it just gets better and better. Instead of using a cultivator to clean the weeds out of a vegetable bed, they drive a machine over the bed that uses cameras to recognize plants that do not belong in that bed, and laser beams to burn the plants out when they're very small.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so
Interesting. Just
zaps them.
just
Yeah.
zaps them.
And like I said, it's not technology that you see everywhere, and it's not exactly new technology.
Yeah.
And it's only useful in a couple of places.
Sure.
Probably wouldn't do that in cotton, because you can rip through a cotton field with a cultivator pretty fast.
Yeah.
And herbicides have filled some of those slots.
Yeah.
Although depending on where you're at and what you're growing, those are popular or not popular.
Sure. Interesting. So a lot's changed.
A lot has changed.
Yeah. And my guess is, to your point, more will probably continue to change. But you mentioned coming here to Lehi and stuff like that. How?
I got to mention just one more.
Go ahead.
In the dairy industry, when I was growing up, I knew a farmer who just farmed across the fence from us. He had 8 or 10 cows, and he milked those by hand, and then later he got a milker that he would actually take to the cow and hook the cow up to, and it would milk into a milk can.
Yeah.
And now, if you go up to this dairy we were talking about earlier, Kohler's Dairy, their cows milk on demand. And
Wow.
it's all, the cow comes in, reads a tag, knows who the cow is, what she's supposed to be producing, how much to feed her, walks up to the machine, it hooks up to her. No people involved at all.
Wow. Wow.
And so those cows can milk 2 or 3 times a day, whatever they're comfortable with.
Yeah.
The machine's also smart enough to make sure that cows are not going in, getting a little milk, and then going out, coming in for some more feed, giving a little milk, and going out.
Sure.
It's just pretty amazing, the technology behind managing that process and limiting the number of people involved, mostly because it's hard to find people who want to milk cows for a living.
Sure. Yeah, it's a very hard labor job, I'm guessing.
Well, it's hard on both ends of the day.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I love that. No, I think it's making things more efficient so that we can use our resources better. Talk to me about, you mentioned Lehi and coming here. Tell me how FFA and Lehi go together, I guess, in the sense of FFA's impact on Lehi specifically.
I don't know if FFA had any impact on Lehi, except a lot of people who were the adults and young adults when I moved here had been involved in FFA. In fact, I tell this story mostly to embarrass Clay Christensen, and I hope it's okay to talk about church, because I went to church that first or second Sunday, and there were men talking about their ag teachers, one of them being Byron Memmott, who is a legend in Lehi and Utah, and the other being Clay Christensen, who's a legend everywhere. Yeah. And Tiersner and I was talking about how much those men had changed either their life personally or the lives of their children.
Wow.
And I just hold those two up as an example, because I want to answer the question about Lehi. That's the kind of history Lehi has with FFA. What I just told you happens all over across the United States. In fact, I've made a point. I've worn a lot of clothing over the years that had FFA on it, and so I get stopped a lot.
Sure.
And people talk to me about it. I've never, ever met anyone who did not remember the name of their ag teacher. And I'm talking about men who are 80 years old or people who are 30 or 40, 20 years old. They remember their ag teacher's name, and they remember that experience that they had. It really is a unique program. You can have that kind of relationship with a math teacher, but it doesn't happen as often.
Sure.
And usually I'd like to say this. When I was a teacher, I had kids on all the way through the high school. I had the straight A kids, I had the football players, I had the track stars and basketball players, I had boys and girls, but mostly what I had was the kids who didn't fit anywhere else. And they would come to my program and they were successful, not because I was an amazing teacher, because I don't think I was just a normal teacher who understood how to use hands-on, relevant activities to teach kids how to do things. And the thing that you're teaching is really not as important as you would think. In other words, what I'm saying, content is not nearly as important as the process you use. So, I don't know, 20 years ago, the governors did some research, talked about the result of that research was they came up with a new concept for saving education, the 3 R's of education. And they were rigor, relevance, and relationship. And I've given many talks about how those 3 R's are exactly what ag education and the FFA does. And a math teacher could do the same thing, except they just don't understand. Let me give you an example. I would go to geometry class, and my geometry teacher, after 10 minutes of me asking questions, would say, "For crying in a bucket, Deimler, do I got to draw you a picture?"
Sure.
And then I would leave that class thoroughly frustrated because he'd been talking about some guy named Pythagoras and the Pythagorean theorem.
Sure. Yeah.
And I would go to my ag class, and my ag teacher would take me to the shop, and he'd say, "I want you to turn that pile of metal into a 4x8 panel. And I want those corners to be square. And if they're not square, you're going to take it apart and do it again." And I'd say, "How do you make them square?" And he said, "We use the 3-4-5 rule. You measure up the side 3 feet, across the bottom 4 feet, and that distance between them, between the 2 marks, needs to be 5 feet. That's the 3-4-5 rule." Or, he didn't say this, but it's also a squared plus b squared equals c squared, which is a Pythagorean theorem.
Yeah.
So how come my geometry teacher, he didn't have a shop, but I also don't think he had the skill. How come he couldn't tell me that, but my ag teacher taught me a skill, the Pythagorean theorem, that I've used for the rest of my life?
Yeah. He showed you how it was applicable, right?
That's the relevance part.
Yeah, the relevance. Yeah, again, because it's hard learning things in theory.
Exactly.
But if you know where they actually apply in life, that's the thing that kids use all the time. When am I going to use this? And so that teacher actually showed you when it would be used, I guess. Then.
Yeah, it would have been a master teaching moment if he'd have said, "Let's stop for a second, go back in the classroom."
Yeah.
And on the board wrote a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and I said 3 squared plus 4 squared is equal to 5 squared, and it actually is, if you do the math. And then he could have talked about Pythagorean theorem.
Sure.
I was probably an adult before I realized what he was doing.
Gotcha. So, yeah, you connected the dots later on then.
I connected the dots later as a teacher as I was talking to kids about this.
Okay.
I can give you another example. On that little farm, we had the Soil Conservation Service come out. That's what they were called back in the 80s. And the superintendent asked them to help me dead level the farm. And that's important because every once in a while the tailwater would get away from us and would go over into the football field, which made the football coach mad. I have no idea why.
Sure.
But so we set about putting a dead level on this field so there's no tailwater. I'm assuming you know what tailwater is.
Yeah.
Okay. And so we staked the field. We took all the measurements with the transit, and then they brought it into a classroom and helped us do the math and showed us where the cuts would be and where the fills would be. And then they brought out a laser, put it in the center of the field, and a tractor that pulled a blade that would go around and make those cuts and fills around the field. And the part I'm getting to is after it was all done and we put the borders in and we were to water it for the first time so that they could come back and level out any parts that settled, the kids said, how long do we keep the water on the border?
Yeah.
Because in the old days, it was easy. You just waited till the water got to the end, then you pulled it. And so they gave us a math equation that was probably this long. It had probably 15 factors in it. And things like how wide the border was, what's the CFS coming out of the ditch, roughness coefficient, all kinds of things. And then when you get done, you have a time That's the answer to the equation. So we did the math. I tried to get the math teacher to come down and help us, and it just was Greek to him. He didn't understand it.
Oh, interesting.
And I couldn't explain it to him because it was just an algebraic equation that I was struggling with. Anyway, we got it figured out and got a time. And so we put the water on the border, started the clock, went down to the end. And I said, okay, it's time to move the water. And the kids are saying, no, you can't move the water. It's not to the end yet. And I said, you got to trust the math. And so we moved the water, and then we went back to the end and watched that water come all the way to the end, and then just like a sheet of glass across that border. And what a great experience for the kids and for me to know that math really does have a lot of power trying to figure out things. You could have done it by trial and error, but
but again, going back to your efficiency thing with the cows, like obviously that's where progress is going to continue to be made, is if we do, it's the brain power plus actually this practical application. Yeah, you could do it from trial and error, but let's do it right the first time.
And again, I'm talking about experiences I had, but those experiences happened in every classroom all across the nation. Yeah. Because ag teachers, it's the material that they teach and the way that they teach it that provide those opportunities to show kids new ways, different ways, and how to use the tools to make it better.
Sure. And is that somebody that is thinking about going into your class? Do they have to have the end goal of being a farmer, or do you think there's other applications for other lines of work then, I guess, based off all these applications that you're telling me?
Yeah, and let's get something clear. Not every kid was successful in my class.
Okay, sure.
I had lots of kids that it was just too slow, or they didn't like the hands-on, or just give me a book to read.
Sure.
I can learn it by myself, and they're right, they can.
Yeah.
But for that, I want to say handful of kids, but it's probably 60, 70% of the kids in the school who learn that way by doing things.
Yeah.
It was a great place to be. And yeah, when I started, I thought it was all about keeping kids in agriculture.
Yeah.
But somewhere down the road, I figured out what my educator had been trying to teach me in college, is that I was not teaching agriculture, I was teaching kids. I never got a parent, and again, I'm talking too much about myself because this happens everywhere. Every ag teacher, every good teacher has these same experiences, the same opportunities, but I never had a parent come up to me and say, thank you for making my kid a better farmer or better whatever. Yeah. But I had lots and lots of them come up to me and say, thank you for giving my kid a reason to go to school and graduate. When you understand why you're there, and I think that ag teachers do, it's about the kids, it's not about.
Yeah.
And so from year to year, even though I taught the main subjects, animal science, plant science, soil science, we taught a little bit of ag business, record keeping, and then personal leadership development, teaching those things across the years, but they would change to meet the circumstances. What's important right now, what's changing. I'll give you an example. Artificial insemination, the original AI, was a big deal when I was a teacher.
Sure.
So I was learning how to do it, trying to teach kids how to do it. Yeah. I had veterinarians come in and teach my kids how to do it. And then we ran into this vet who said, we're doing embryo transfers. That was unheard of in the 80s. It wasn't unheard of, but it was a very new science.
Sure.
And so my kids, and on that little farm, we always had a couple of cows or heifers that needed bred. And so he'd swing in on a Thursday afternoon and say, I've got leftover embryos. And he'd sit up right in class with a microscope, and we'd pull the embryos out of the tank, and he'd defrost them. And under the microscope, the kids could see them actually come back to life, and not come back to life, but move around. And then he would teach them about, you take those embryos in a pipette and you insert them into a cow that's been prepared. And we never had one that went to full term. If we had, it would have been a great fundraiser, because some of those embryos he was bringing back. You don't take a $800 cow and put her embryos and everything else. You take a $8,000 cow or $20,000 cow, and you spread out those embryos around so that you can make more money. So he was putting high dollars into some pretty low dollar. But anyway, my kids had that experience of being on what I would consider the cutting edge of that technology, because of someone in town who was a part of that industry and came to my school and did that.
Wow.
Yeah, my kids were, and again, I'm not saying anything about me. I was just in a place, in an opportunity. This happens all over the United States because ag teachers are connected to that kind of thing.
And that, I like that story too, because it's showing that, again, when you think of farming, you think of probably mending fences, milking cows, stuff like that. You just mentioned, hey, doing embryo, that's science. That's like a scientist in a lab and doing, that's very different. So again, still farming, or at least in that area. And so I think you're expanding a lot of our vision of what is quote unquote farming and where the jobs are and stuff like that. So
we actually had some teachers up north that were doing the same thing with sheep and goats, which is a little more difficult than with cattle. And so they were working with a veterinarian, and they made some pretty good advances on artificial insemination and embryo transfers on their goat herd and their sheep herd. Same technology. But the most important thing is not that kids learn how to do that, but that they recognize that it is a technology, it is science, they can understand it, they can do it with their hands, and it makes them less afraid to talk about some other things.
Yeah, good. What if somebody's a youth and they're thinking about going into these classes and stuff like that, what advice would you give them, I guess, if they're on the fence about this?
Boy, I don't know. The way I encourage kids into my program is, and the way most teachers do, is they just run a fun program.
Sure.
They're always doing something outside the classroom. We had a farm, and I lived in Arizona, so we had 364 days of sunshine every year.
Yeah.
And so we were in the classroom for 10 or 15 minutes, and then we were outside doing something, which was a part of the curriculum. It's one thing to talk about fibrous roots and tap roots. It's another thing to go out, be able to go outside with crops that are growing and pull one up and say, here's what we're talking about. Same thing with livestock.
Yeah.
We were in the 80s. We're talking a lot about me being a teacher, which doesn't have anything to do with Lehi, but
hey, you're part of Lehi, so I like it. This is what we want.
When computers were just coming out, I had an Apple IIc, I think, in my classroom.
Yeah, I remember that computer.
I was introduced to the spreadsheet, and it was love at first sight.
Sure.
And so the kids and I built a spreadsheet that would take care of that awful calculation about if you got an animal that weighs this much, how much feed do you have to put in them to get them to the certain weight at this time? And we built that spreadsheet, and I'd go to their home to do a visit, and we'd weigh their animals, and the next day in class, we'd plug the numbers in the spreadsheet and instantly calculate how much they should feed them, how much more or how much less they should feed them to.
Yeah.
Is that a useful skill? Yeah. But most important, it was an opportunity to teach them that here's a math skill that they had that they could apply in dozens and hundreds of different places in their life. And so that's really what ag education was all about. It was trying to encourage kids to think about ag as a career, but it was mostly about trying to help them not be afraid of something that had been beating the heck out of them all their. I tell this story. I was not a bad student when I was in grade school or high school. I was not a bad student. I made fairly good grades.
Yeah.
But I spent my ag teacher was my first real teacher who had a positive comment to me. I'd tell this story everywhere I go too, that my teacher would say, hey, Deimler, I want to talk to you about judging livestock. I've been watching. I think you make a great livestock judger. And it was all a lie. I was a horrible livestock judger. But it was the first class in school where if I wasn't successful at something, there were 15 things around the corner that I could try to do.
Sure. And
some of them I was successful at, and some of them I was not very successful at. And I think that's a good environment for a kid. And research will show you that if you're in a math class and you hit a barrier where you can't get over it, a normal class, 999 times out of 1,000, the teacher just blasts right past it. And if you don't get it, you don't get it.
Yeah. They move on.
And they have to, because they got 40 kids in the classroom and they got to get to the end of the kids, whatever.
Yeah.
But research will show you that if you were to stop with Buddy Deimler and sit down with him and help him over that barrier, that will make him twice as more likely to beat the next barrier on his own. And I think everybody understands that as an educator, but they don't use those skills very often because you got so many kids in the classroom and you got to keep up the pace. You got to get to the end of the book.
Yeah.
I didn't teach that way because I learned that I was more successful a different way. And so I tried to replicate that for my kids. Example is welding. I was a welding teacher also, and a kid would come in and they would do some welding, they would show it to me, and they would go, "So what do you think, Mr. Deimler, will that pass?" And I'd say, "I don't know, what do you think?"
Yeah.
And then they would repeat back to me the standards that have been taught, and does that meet the standard? And they go, "It doesn't really meet the standard." I go, "That's a very good observation.
Yeah.
What do you think you ought to do?" In my mind, that's what rigor is.
Sure.
Putting the learning process in the hands of the student.
Yeah.
The evaluation, how do you solve this problem? It would be easy for me to answer. I would just say,
Yep.
turn the machine up and hold your arc a little closer to the plate. It'll fix your problem. But they needed to figure that out. And that can be replicated in all the classes across the school.
Yeah.
It's much harder to do in some other areas than the examples that I'm giving. But yeah, and like I said, I wasn't a bad student, but I did not feel successful anywhere in school until I got to my ag class. And that affected everything else.
Sure. Put you on the trajectory that you ended up going on to. Yeah.
Yeah, I never thought, even though my dad wanted me to go to college and to be an engineer, that's what he was.
Yeah.
It never occurred to me because school was such a, I don't want to say struggle, but it was not fun.
Yeah.
And it never occurred to me until my ag teacher said, "Deimler, I've been watching you. I think you'd make a great ag teacher.
Yeah.
What do you think?" And I say, "Yeah, I think I could do that." He said, "Are you going to have to go to school?"
Yeah.
I'd say, "I don't know if I want to do that." And he said, "Let me hook you up with some." It's just
Yeah.
one opportunity after another to open doors and
Yeah.
encourage kids. And again, that's been repeated
Yeah.
tens of thousands of times across the years and across the nation. That's just what ag teachers do. So,
you mentioned school and stuff like that. What do you think about the resurgence of kind of trade schools? More people going to the trades as opposed to just, I think for a while we were just blanket teaching college for everyone. And maybe now we're stepping back and saying, okay, hey, get specialized. And so whether that's in college or an electrician, a welder, whatever, what are your thoughts on how this society is maybe changing a little bit there?
yeah. I think I started like most high school teachers. I had a college degree, master's degree.
Yeah.
That's required for your field. And
Yeah.
so when I first started, that was my focus. I wanted kids to get prepared for college.
Yeah.
And it wasn't very many years after that I learned that not every kid was going to go to college.
Yeah.
And I also recognized that many of their parents never went to college, but they were very successful. Many of them way more successful than I was.
Sure.
However you look at it, financially, hours worked,
Yeah.
homes they lived, however you looked at it,
Yeah.
these people were overwhelmingly successful. So it didn't take long for me to figure out that, especially with the kids I was working with, that trades could be very important.
Yeah.
We always maintained a line, and I think that's always been true in ag programs, that education is critical.
Yes.
You leave high school, you're going to have to get an education somewhere.
Yes.
Doesn't have to be college.
Yes.
Doesn't have to be 4-year. But you're going to have to get into a good apprenticeship program, or you're going to have to go and get some, even if you're top of your field, you're going to be taking classes to keep you at the top of your field, sharpening those skills. A lot of times, if you're a good welder in a company and they finish one project and go to another project, different process, so they'll send you back to school to resharpen your skills on that process or those machines or whatever. And I said, it's going to be happening for the rest of your life, so you need to. So yeah, trades have always been a big part of what I was teaching. Like I said, I was a welding teacher.
Yeah.
And most of the ag teachers in the state of Utah also run a shop. Not all of them, but most of them do. And the ones that don't have a greenhouse.
Sure.
And some of them have livestock facilities. All those things could require a college degree, but all of them don't require a college degree.
Yeah.
And I think that the one thing that made ag education and FFA successful in Lehi is because Lehi has always been a very entrepreneurial town. And I don't mean necessarily that the parents worked for themselves as much as it's a kind of a thought process.
Sure.
My dad was one of those guys, and he worked for the government all his life.
Sure.
But he never ran into a problem that he couldn't figure out and fix. And if he didn't have the skill, he just taught himself.
Sure.
And that's kind of what Lehi people are like. They're very entrepreneurial in that nature, that if it needs to be done, they can do it.
Sure. They go about it a different way. They don't, oh, I hit a roadblock. Oh, I'm dead. So let's go around. Let's do this way. Yeah. It's how do we attack this problem in a different way?
So I think that's a good fit there. And those kids tend to be a little, some people would call them high-spirited. But they're great kids to work with because they're just not satisfied to do the problems and turn them in and get a grade. They want to know why, and they want to know how to use it, and then they want to put it to work, and they want to make things with it and do things with it. So It's just it's a good place.
Yeah. Yeah. And have you've been doing this for a long time. Have you stayed in contact with, or maybe not necessarily friendship wise, but like seen where, hey, this program, FFA, produced these different jobs, or these kids went and did, this job or that job, or have you been able to see where that program leads to for these kids?
Are you talking about specific high school programs or ag education in general?
Education in general.
Yeah, I would say that here's some more statistics that I love to use.
Yeah.
And that is that Ohio State did this survey, and what they found was if you were a part of a quality ag education program or a quality career and technical education program, which could be ag, business ed, family consumer science, health, the whole 9 yards. If you were part of that program and participated in the CTSO, which is the FFA part, if you did that, then you were more likely to graduate from high school than your peers who were not a part of that program. You were more likely to go on to education than your peers. You were more likely to complete that education. You were more likely to work during high school. You were more likely to work during your post-secondary experience. You were hired earlier. Your earnings were higher. Just every statistic that you could measure.
Yeah.
You go to a school board meeting, these are the things they talk about. I don't know why after 29 years of me telling them that the answer's right here, they still don't understand it. But,
sure.
But those things are true. And when you look at it from that perspective, kids who complete those kinds of programs and are successful at them are just more successful high school kids.
Sure.
And especially the kids that most career and technical education teachers deal with. They're not very successful in other parts of the high school, but they can be very successful in a welding program, or very successful in a woods program, or very successful in an ag program. And it helps their life later. Here's another statistic for you. The number one problem that employers have as they hire newly college graduated students is that they have zero work experience. A very big part of career and technical education is work-based learning. In other words, putting the skills that you learn in the classroom to use in a real world work environment. Kind of like an apprenticeship.
Sure.
That was a big part of ag education. We called it supervised agricultural experience programs. Every kid was supposed to have one. And many of those kids were very successful in what they were doing. I have an ag teacher out. I'll try to keep names and schools out of it, but he won all kinds of awards with his landscaping business in high school. And then he just kept that business going, worked his way right through college. And then when he got to be a teacher, it got to be a little too much for him, so he started breaking up. I think he sold the business or broke up parts of it for his high school kids. And now the kids in his high school program are using those same skills that took him through high school, college. But he's one of those kind of kids, it doesn't matter what he comes up against, he's going to figure it out, and he's going to make lemons or lemonade out of lemons. And again, just one teacher example, but it happens over and over again because that's the kind of people who tend to be in those kinds of programs.
That's awesome. I love those stories. And obviously the value of work, right? I think we focus on sports and music in school, but I think a job should also be a focus as far as kids go, right? There's a lot of things they can learn from those jobs that'll apply to real life.
And the point is that when he was a freshman in high school, he probably mowed all those lawns. When he was a senior in high school, he didn't mow lawns anymore. He was managing people. And when he was in college, he probably had 5 or 6 people working for him. And
those are valuable skills.
Those are valuable skills. And what a way to, instead of borrowing money to go to school, what a way to work your way through school.
To not have any debt then, and
not have any,
or very little. I don't know.
Very little. I don't know.
That's awesome. Tell me, you mentioned school board, different things like that. What things would you like to see improved in this program? What areas do you think, hey, because obviously it sounds like you're doing a lot of good, and the program itself is doing a lot of good. My guess is, like anything, there's areas for improvement. Any thoughts on that?
If you're asking me to improve the school and the school board, that's easy. We need to turn it around so that the major focus is on the 80% of the kids who benefit from these kinds of programs and not spend so much time on the 20 kids who play football. Or the 25 kids who play basketball. And I'm making those numbers up because I really have no idea. But I honestly think that overwhelmingly the kids in a high school was developed to prepare kids to be prepared for a university or college experience.
Okay.
And even in a state like Utah, that's 25%. 25% of the kids who graduate from high school go on to complete a 4-year degree. And that's Utah, where that number is very high. In some states, it's not that high at all.
Yeah.
So that leaves 75% of the kids who just went through a process that prepared them for something that
they don't plan to do.
Yeah, they don't plan to do.
Yeah.
And I think that's unfortunate. I think we ought to focus. And like I told you, that I had kids in my program that were not successful. It was at 20%.
Sure.
It just wasn't fast enough for them. They didn't appreciate doing the hands-on. They didn't need it. They didn't need me.
Yeah.
Show me a book. I can learn this. And then I'll come to you. And they're probably right. There's no doubt that they were smarter than me. That's not the point. The point is that 75% of the kids need a different experience. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't need rigor. That doesn't mean that they don't need to be pushed beyond what they think they can do. But I honestly believe that if we turn the system around to focus on those 75% of the kids, most of our problems would go away. You're always going to have knuckleheads in a school.
Sure.
But kids who are having their needs met are going to be less of a challenge. They're going to graduate from high school. Here's another piece of data that I've always used over the years. When I was in Arizona, my principal did a study. They were losing kids between the 9th grade and the 10th grade. And there were a lot of reasons for that, and I can't remember them all. Some of them had to do with economics. That kid was getting to a place where they could bring money into the family.
Sure.
So for
maybe the family needed it, right?
Those families needed it.
Yeah.
Education was not as important. There were lots and lots of reasons. But they did a study, and what they found shocked them. What they found was a kid, and going back to what I told you earlier, a kid who was involved in a CTE program in the 9th grade was less likely to drop out going to the 10th grade.
Because maybe he could see the value of
it. More relevance.
Yeah.
The relationship thing was very important. I won't say that's probably too political, but I think relationship is critical. I don't know how old your kids are, but my kids benefited from having some good adult mentors in their life when they wouldn't listen to me or their mother anymore.
Yeah.
And that probably starts in the 9th grade when they start looking around saying, Mom and Dad don't have any idea what they're talking about.
Yeah.
So I think relationship is critical. But I also think the relevance and the rigor, showing kids that they can do hard things.
Yeah.
Showing them the way to do hard things. My dad would sit there with a slide rule and try to teach me algebra tricks, and I just couldn't get it.
Yeah,
It didn't make any sense to me.
Sure. And so you're saying right now school focuses on the 25% that'll go to college and do that, and you're saying, hey, the 75% end up maybe doing a little college or trade or no college at all, no thing. So you're saying, hey, it should focus then on more on that 75%. What would that look like? Tell me how that.
$1 million stadiums would turn into welding shops and wood shops and business labs, computer labs.
Sure.
And schools do a relatively good job with that already, but
sure.
It doesn't have the same focus as we're talking about, which is providing relevance and rigor for kids.
Yeah.
In fact, it was a constant battle with, I shouldn't be negative about, because any educator in my mind they are trying to do their best to help kids, or they wouldn't be there. I'd say most of them, that's true. And so I shouldn't badmouth any educator, but I can't tell you the number of calls I got from welding teachers and ag teachers who had large areas, square footage-wise, that could easily be turned into 4 classrooms and filled with 40 kids each. That's 160 kids versus the 25 or 30 that they had in a shop area.
Sure.
Those space is expensive.
Yeah.
And it's not popular. People don't line up at the gate to pay $5 to get in to watch a kid weld. They just don't. But they should.
Sure.
And some districts have done some things where they have a show night where kids are doing art projects or something, or Nebo District does the Nebo Welding Classic, or I don't remember what it's called, but the projects that come to that thing would astound you. It all started with a drift trike. Kids build drift trikes and race them. That gets a lot of attention because it's motors and gasoline and welding. Right? It's fun. But you got trailers, gooseneck trailers, dump trailers, all kinds of projects that I can't even remember to list that These kids build in their welding classes and their ag classes.
Yeah.
And to see that, a superintendent walks in and sees that and then begins to realize that these projects were built by the kids that are not seen
Sure.
at the school.
Sure.
And that sounds negative, but it really is the case, because they've already been pointed out that you're not going to college, so you're not helping my numbers any, because at awards night, what do they talk about? It's who got the scholarships? How many
Sure.
millions of dollars of scholarships did we land?
Yeah.
And it's never about the kids who are in apprenticeship programs and that's changing a little bit, but not enough.
You bring up good points. That's if the vast majority, I mean, that 75% majority, then that should be the focus. And they're what makes up a lot of society. We
Yeah,
need
you would
trailers.
think.
I have a trailer for my razor. You have these things that are part of our everyday life that came from hardworking people. And again, that's why I do like that the trades are being a little more focused on lately, as opposed to only college. And I like that school, I think it's heading in the direction that you're wanting, at least from an outsider's perspective, and maybe you can correct me, but because it feels like some of us are saying, hey, wait a second. And especially for those that have gone to college and have hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt and have a liberal arts degree that does
Right.
them nothing. And so it's, okay, wait a second, what are we paying for here? We're trying to make kids ready for society, and they got to fit in somewhere, and we need widgets and different things like that to be produced. And I don't know, it does feel like it's heading in that direction. But again, that's just maybe from my outside opinion. But
Right. Yeah, and I think guys like Mike Rowe have gone a long ways to
sure,
make people aware that there is another side of the world out there.
yeah,
And I have to admit that we still have the 29 years I was in ag education in Utah. Our program grew every year. We started out with 80 programs. We're probably at 200 now.
oh wow,
Or no, that's not right. Maybe it is 100 180, 109, I don't know.
yeah, sure, but more, yeah,
Way
double,
more.
yeah,
Now, a lot of that has to do with the fact that the population has grown incredibly. But part of it has to do with good administrators who are looking at what ag teachers are doing and going, hey, I got to have some place to put these kids where they'll have a good experience.
yeah. Again, preparing, we got to prepare every kid for the future and to get married, have families, and they need to produce. They need to have a job to provide for those things, provide for those people, and whether that's rocket scientist or ditch digger, I don't know. We need to have a job for them and stuff. So we need to prepare them.
Here's another thing that we don't think about very often, and that is my oldest son, left high school, and he wasn't a bad student. He made pretty good grades, but he did not have a very positive experience because he asked too many questions, which can be annoying. I know I was his father.
Sure.
But he left and he told me, he said, I'll never darken the doors of a classroom again, ever. And he got into an apprenticeship program to be a lineman. And so he worked all day as a lineman, and then I think it was 2 or 3 nights a week he was in class for 2 or 3 hours a night.
Yeah.
That's as much time I spent in class when I was in college.
Sure.
So 4 years later, he's a journeyman lineman.
Yeah.
We can put the numbers on a spreadsheet and see if they match up, but dang it, that's as much a college education as what I had.
Agreed.
And in my mind, more valuable because he was doing stuff during the day that he could ask questions about at night and then take back the very next day and put into use.
Sure.
And I know I'm making this sound very clean and clinical, and it wasn't. But it's still a much better process than sitting in a class for 4 years and then being thrown into the world. And,
Sure.
And to cap that conversation off, now he's working in the front office. He's a safety director for a small electrical co-op, and he's going to college so he can get a BS degree, so he can advance.
Sure.
But the point is that the teachers would be shaking their heads when my son and those kids like him were leaving going, we missed that one.
Yeah, sure.
Having no idea that there's another route
Yeah.
to get done. And is he successful? Yeah, good grief.
Yeah.
He lives in a bigger house than I live in and drives better trucks than I drive.
So
he's been very successful.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And he has a great family, and
Yeah.
it's a different way.
It goes back to your entrepreneurial thought where we're talking about different ways. There's not one way.
Right.
There's not one way. There's multiple ways. And so I think wise teachers, administrators would recognize that, okay, hey, again, we're different people. We all have different interests. Let's just help prepare. And I think it would go back to, okay, you should always be learning. right? I think in any job,
Right.
you just talk about your son, he's going back, he's still learning. Ironically, he's going back to college. He's still learning. And that's just a general motto to live by with anything. Because especially in this fast-paced world, AI, robotics, all these different things are happening. We got to keep learning. Otherwise, we're out of the game. So,
Yeah, I told a story about my oldest son. I don't want you to think that he's my favorite child, because he's not.
Sure. Yeah.
All my children have been successful because of
Good.
one thing, because they know how to work and they know how to learn.
Yeah.
You know, I got kids in all kinds of different areas, but they're always willing to go take a class, get a certificate,
Yeah.
do whatever they need to do to be more valuable at work, and they just know how to work.
Yeah.
And I'm proud of all my kids that way. They've all made a contribution, and they're all good moms and dads, and they're just good kids.
Good. If they're listening, hey,
Yeah.
Dad wanted to make sure, hey, I wasn't singling out one. I love you all. Hey, that's good. I like it. Buddy, this has been great. We've talked about quite a few things. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you wanted to hit on, or anything that we haven't done? I think it's been pretty comprehensive.
Yeah, we talked a lot about agriculture. We talked a lot about me, which I didn't think this was supposed to be about. But I just want to say something about FFA. I think that FFA is, I think you've heard through some of the comments I've made that it was very important to me. I had wonderful parents, and they taught me everything I needed to know to be successful, mostly how to work hard and how to have some grit in challenges in life. So I'm not discounting that at all, but my ag teacher provided a totally different experience in high school than I'd ever had before. And I appreciated that, and we'll always talk about it. In fact, about 5-6 years ago, no, that's not right, probably 7-8 years ago, we went to visit my ag teacher when we were home visiting my parents, my wife and my mom and dad. We just got in a car and drove to, probably lived about 80 miles away, I don't know, and just went and visited him, spent a Sunday afternoon sitting and talking with him. That's the kind of relationship we have.
Oh.
I hope that I have had that kind of relationship with the kids that I taught. And in fact, I'm pretty confident in saying that I did with some of them, because I'm still in contact with some of them.
Good.
But the one that made the biggest difference was the ag teachers that made such an impact on my kids' lives. Because when they're little, you got things under control, and you're just parenting, just doing a great job. And then they get to that age where nothing you says makes any sense or makes any different. And boy, I'm so grateful to have a good mentor, not just in the church, but outside the church in the public school. And almost without exception, that was an ag teacher.
Yeah.
And with one of my kids, or with multiple ones of my kids, it was chorus teachers or theater teachers or drama teachers.
Sure.
That relationship that we're talking about is so important. And I don't think we allow that to happen as it needs to anymore, for a million reasons.
Yeah.
But boy, am I grateful for that in FFA. I have, you talk about family, I have the family that, my mom and dad and my children, my wife and her family, and that's important. But when you think about it, 43 years in a career, I've known some of the people that I still talk to, and I'm retired, so I still talk to them.
Sure.
I've known them for 43 years. They are like my family.
Yeah.
We've been through some stuff and helped each other out of some jams and that kind of stuff. That's a pretty good family. I heard someone give this talk one time or make this comment that he was saying that the thing about ag education and FFA is I know that I could break down in any town in the United States, and if I could just find the ag teacher, things would be okay. And
love that.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. And so it's not just that adult teacher relationship, that's translated to kids.
Yeah.
I can't tell you, it didn't happen that many times, but an ag teacher would call me and say, hey, I got a kid broke down about 20 miles from you, and I'd in my car, and there we go.
Yeah.
And they would do the same for my kid.
Yeah.
And what a great program.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe this is a good place to hang this up, but I could keep talking about, you probably can't tell this, but I'm a little passionate about this. I do have to tell you one story that
Go ahead.
That I think is so critical, and I hope people who listen to this take this to heart, not just about ag education, but about everything. And that's, I was at a meeting, I was talking to a district administrator. I considered him a friend, so we were just talking, catching up, and his daughter walked up, and he introduced his daughter, and the first words out of my mouth were, so what are you doing? She said, I'm an education major at SUU. And I said, have you ever thought about being an ag teacher? And he just busted out laughing, and she busted out laughing. And I said, what's so funny? And she said, he told me that you were going to say that 2 seconds into the conversation.
Sure.
And I share that for a very specific reason, is if we have worries about what kids are going to do, you have to remember that almost all the kids were just like me. I had no idea what I was going to do. There were 50 things that I was interested in.
Sure.
None of them worth a darn.
Yeah.
But my ag teacher was the one who said, that adult mentor, doesn't have to be an ag teacher, it could be any good adult mentor, said, have you ever thought about, I think you could do that. I think you'd be a good one. That's true whether you're talking about being an ag teacher or being a welder or being a doctor or being a whatever. And I hope that adults realize that they need to be advocates for being an adult and making a contribution. And I was passionate about teaching ag. I could have been talking about, have you ever thought about, I don't know, you make it up.
Sure.
Yeah. But, and so, people just expected that from me, and we need to expect that from every teacher, from every adult.
Yeah.
Because kids don't often think about themselves in that kind of a perspective that I could be a teacher. I could graduate. Good grief, I could pass chemistry. I could pass 8 hours of chemistry.
Yeah.
I had no idea that was possible until I did it.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
I know you're a little uncomfortable talking about yourself so much, but the reality is you are FFA on a community level. So that's why we have focused on you, because we're not necessarily talking about the organization on a corporate level. We're talking about the ground floor, the boots on the ground kind of people, and that's where you stand.
I would disagree with you. I was in the state. I worked for the State Board of Education, so I worked in an office in downtown Salt Lake.
Okay.
I lived in Lehi.
Sure.
But you've had multiple amazing ag teachers over the years. Lynn York was here when I started. He's long retired. I don't know where he is anymore. Doug Webb was my kid's ag teacher. He's in the district office now as a secondary curriculum director. Nathan Bushman, Brett Robertson, Lisa Hadfield. It's Clement now. Suzanne Spencer. And there's others that I can't remember. Those are the ag teachers that really, boots on the ground, that really made a difference in Lehi. Since you won't stop me, one more story. Doug Webb called me one day and he said, Daimler, I figured out that your son is never, or your daughter's never ever going to be a livestock judger. We need to figure out something else to do. And so I said, we have this new thing called agri-science, where kids develop a science project in agriculture, then they do a poster board and the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
And so before I knew it, he had his dad involved, Bruce Webb, who also lives here in Lehi. I don't know, over many years, 15 years, Bruce Webb worked with Lehi high school kids, my kids personally, and many others, to help them develop a science project. My son's science project was, my daughter's project was, she was doing fertilizer trials on pasture grass. So she had a block of grass and they divided up into pieces. They treated each piece differently. They cut the grass, dried it, weighed it, tested it for nutrients, and wrote a report on how much fertilizer can provide this much benefit to the nutrition of the grass.
Yeah.
Way beyond my ability, way beyond my daughter's ability, but man, she come out of that knowing that I could do this if I had to.
Yeah.
In fact, BYU offered her a scholarship, and to my great sorrow, it was a scholarship in agronomy, and she had no desire to.
Sure.
Even though it was a great project, she really didn't want to study agronomy.
Sure.
And that's fair.
Yeah.
And has not taken away from her one bit. So,
yeah.
But that's just an example of what good ag teachers with good community support can do to help kids. Going back to that, I've been watching you. I think you do a great job doing this. What do you think? Kind of a thing. You don't hear that in school enough.
Sure. And that's something that Doug did for your daughter, then, is what you're saying.
That's something that all ag teachers do for every kid.
Yeah.
They're all the same.
Yeah. That's awesome. Again, making an impact.
Making an impact.
Yeah. Love that. Buddy, anything else?
I could talk for hours about it.
It's a risk asking that question, but I think you are passionate about this, and that's a very good thing. I can see you've done a lot of good, and again, you're shedding light on others that are also doing that same good. So good job. No, I love this. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming here.
For all my nerves, this has been more fun. I should have known. Once you start me, I can't stop. It's just.
I can see you start to roll. Yeah. Yeah.
I wish you could just pour that into a teacher before you send them out into the world, into a classroom.
Sure.
And not just ag teachers, but every teacher. Can you imagine a math teacher being that And some of them are, but most of them are not.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the benefit you have with what you teach is, again, the application part.
Right.
I guess you're seeing, because math is very broad, and obviously you use math. You mentioned the Pythagorean theorem, and so obviously math is involved in it, but I think math is sometimes broad, and so it's not, hey, I'm going to be a math teacher. That's very few, but you're able to apply it to, hey, this could be this or that or whatever, and I think there's a lot of benefit to that, where you're able to see the end result. And we all kind of want to see where this is heading. Why, if I'm studying this, what's the purpose? I think we're all wired that way to want to understand those things. And I think, again, your area does that. So good job.
Thank you.
Yeah, good job.
This was fun.
Good. No, I'm glad you came on. So thank you. Thanks for coming on. And maybe we'll try to get some of those other teachers on here too. So that'd be fun to get to know them too. But okay, thank you. Appreciate you. Thank you for joining us on Roots and Branches of Lehi. I hope today's story helped you feel a little more connected to the people who make up our community. Remember, every person here has a unique story, and together, we're what makes Lehi feel like home. If you know someone who would be a great fit for this podcast, please fill out the form in the show notes so we can reach out and schedule an interview. We'd love to hear from you. A big thank you to our sponsors, the Work Harding Home Mortgage Team and Play Harding Nightly Vacation Rentals, for supporting this show and helping us bring our community closer together. Until next time, keep growing those roots and reaching out to your branches. Take care.